Hello, this is the lovely Janice Pierce, a longstanding friend of mine that I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that we met each other through a networking group called BNI. Is that right?
That's correct.
Lovely. Janice was admitted to the bar in 1993, and she's board certified in estate planning and probate law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization, with areas of practice of estate planning, probate, tax, business transactions, and real estate, which is why we're chatting today, right?
That's right. That is right.
Did I get all of that right, Janice?
You got all of that right. Thank you very much. And yes, we met at BNI, and I don't know if I can do a plug, but I certainly did meet some wonderful people.
Isn't that the truth?
Networking organization.
Yep. Me too. Well, I'm glad that we can chat today because the real estate market is so dynamic, and I've always been such a very big believer. Everything that happens in real estate affects everybody. If it affects me, it's going to affect you. It's going to affect the hairdressers. It's going to affect everybody, right? It's such a huge part of our economy.
It is a huge part, so that when interest rates change, the dynamics in the market change.
That's right.
And that's something that we have no control over. We just have to, I think we have to react to it. Is that really the right term to use? Is that agents are on the front line of having to react to that for their clients?
To some degree, but I would also say that I try to be a little bit more analytical than just being reactive. I try to think about what is the interest rate, for example, or what would it be for this particular client? How does that create an obstacle? And what can we do to overcome that or minimize it? And there's lots of really creative ways that we can potentially get the seller to contribute in buying the rate down. The buyer can contribute in buying their own rate down. Sometimes there's other little ways that you can get discounts, or other ways where you get the opposite of a discount,
right?
Which is usually my clientele. You know, I work very largely, about 90% of what I do is investment purchase. So I work with a lot of investors.
Okay.
And that, of course, makes me constantly thinking of you and moving in circles with people like you, where we're thinking tax planning or estate planning, or even purchasing properties within an estate or a trust.
That's in particular with a trust. I have, over the last couple of years, I've noticed that a lot of people who come to me who want trust prepared for their children, the reason why they're doing this in a lot of instances is to give the trust money to buy a house for their children to live in, for a child or children to live in. And it's an unusual dynamic in that the interplay between a trust and property taxes is, part of the game of owning real estate, being a homeowner individually, is having the homestead property exemption for property taxes. And that sort of gets flipped on its head when a trust purchases the trust purchases a home for an individual, because they do not get the same benefits of the homestead exemption that an individual gets. But there are times where a parent really is concerned about a child being able to manage this asset and making the payments and making sure that everything is taken care of. So there are certainly times where not having the homestead exemption is probably in the best interest of a child who's living in the home. And that's an interesting dynamic. It certainly isn't for everyone, but there are those clients that it is truly the way for them to go.
How does that benefit the occupant / child if it's not a homestead exemption?
Not having the homestead exemption isn't the benefit. The benefit is that you've got a trustee who can make sure that the payments are made, that the mortgage payments are made, that the taxes are paid, and that the home does not fall into a state of disrepair. Understood. So you've got really ownership although the beneficiary has beneficial ownership, the ownership is in the trustee, and the trustee's able to step in and manage the property. And sometimes, I don't know that we always think about this, but sometimes it's a really important thing for certain children, depending on their age, depending on their maturity level. It's something that we look at long and hard, losing the homestead exemption. But on the other hand, like I said, sometimes it's just necessary.
So 2 questions that I would have for you about that would be, I could see this being very valuable for maybe someone that has a child or a family member that has a disability.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so another reason is if you've got a special needs child who's got public assistance, and there's concern about that child owning certain assets or assets over a certain amount, this works out beautifully, is to have this home in a special needs trust where you've got a trustee to manage it. And then at the death of the child, it goes to whoever the adult who set up the trust says that it goes to. And that's of great benefit to keep a child on, or to keep a young adult or even an older adult on public assistance in particular, so that they have medical insurance, either Medicare or Medicaid, through Medicare or Medicaid.
Fascinating. And so another follow-up question I would have for you about that is, what do you find or see, if anything, that's prevalent for people that don't have children? So
in what regard?
So if I didn't have any children, but I had assets, do you see any kind of common denominator in where people are leaving their assets?
And that's very interesting. It sort of comes in 2 groups: people who really want to leave a legacy and put their money in charity because there is 1 or 2 causes they greatly care about. And then there are people who have siblings, nieces, and nephews. For example, someone who has been very lucky and has started a company that was extremely lucrative and sold it, and may have other family members, whether that's parents or nieces and nephews or in-laws or whoever it is, that who they can benefit from transferring these assets at their death. And it can be done in a number of different ways. It can be done through charity. It can be done through alternatives. For example, a charitable remainder trust, where you have assets invested and they go to certain people during their lifetime, and at their death, it goes to charity. Whatever's left goes to charity. So there are very creative ways to leave both real estate and non-real estate assets. Mm-hmm. For the benefit of individuals and charities, which is a fairly nice thing to be able to do.
That's super cool. Do you get involved at all at the death and in regards to let's say my daughter inheriting something at the step up in basis on the value of the property? Do you get involved in that?
I do. So as the way I actually got into real estate for the most part was by being a probate attorney, mm-hmm. and having, and in a great number of the estates that I have, there is real estate involved. Mm-hmm. And generally depending on who it passes to, and sometimes there has to be creative ways. For example, we've got a surviving spouse, and let's say that the first spouse who dies leaves assets in trust for their spouse. Mm-hmm. And of course, one of the biggest assets is going to be the home. Well, then we've got the analysis of what's going to happen if we've got a home that these older folks were living in, and it had the homestead exemption and the over 65 homestead exemption, which is a great thing to keep property taxes level. Well, what do we do when we've got a spouse who leaves assets in trust for the survivor, and then we've got a split interest? We do have the step up in basis in Texas because we've got community property. When people own a home as community property, both halves get a step up in basis. So we certainly want that step up in basis. But what do we do if we've got half of that home owned in a trust that doesn't get the homestead exemption, and half of the home that does get the homestead exemption. So we work on creative ways to make sure that we've got the home in the place where the exemptions are going to be the most valuable to the surviving spouse. And you know, I'm going through now, I have several older clients. I'm talking about clients in their 90s who may have left their residence but still own it and are thinking, well, maybe I should just go ahead and sell it. And almost routinely, unless there's really an underlying reason that this person needs the cash to take care of themselves, we want to hold off on the sale of that asset simply because the step up in basis at death is a huge plus for people who go to sell that, who are going to sell the asset shortly after death, or within, I would say shortly after death, I mean within a year of death. That we've got, if you've got a $2.5 million gain on the sale of this property because someone bought it 50 or 60 years ago.
Right.
And if they sell it today, the capital gains are going to be outrageous. If they held on and held on to it until death and they got a step up in basis and sell it within the next year, the capital gains are going to be negligible. Right. And that is a huge, it is a way to create wealth for your children, because you're not diminishing the size of your estate by the payment of capital gains tax on the sale of that asset prematurely.
Definitely. And I'm not an expert at this, but I think that the capital gains currently would be somewhere around 20% on the gain, and
it's around 20. It can, I think it can go up to 23 depending on what your adjusted gross income is, and I think it can be as low as 15 for lower income people. That might have gone up to 18%, but somewhere in there.
I think if it's an investment property, they have to pay a 25% capital gains on depreciation. Okay,
on the recapture of depreciation.
Right.
And that's a little bit different from the home someone is living in. But the rules, it's important to get an attorney involved, if for no other reason than to tell you what the tax implications are, or what they're going to be under various scenarios.
So you talk about a lot of your clients that have real estate in their portfolios. So what if they have multiple real estate assets in their portfolios, not just a homestead or primary residence?